a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or it would have been, in New York was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices.
His claim to fame was to say that there was inherent racism in expressways, freeways, and overpasses in this country. We all woke up this morning to an unbelievable scene out of Baltimore, Maryland, as the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed after a collision with a freight ship. Now, I want you to look at this video. Surely you've seen it by now. This is the beginning portion of the video that is sped up, all right? And as you can see, here at 1:15 in the morning, I want to say, well, 1:24 in the morning, there you go. You can see the ship coming here and the power loss that it suffered. Now, it's still drifting. All right, I'm going to pause it here. You're also going to see on the expanse of the bridge a lot of cars crossing that bridge. This is I-695. They call it the Baltimore Beltway. DC has a beltway, that's 495. Up in Baltimore, they have a beltway. It's called 695, and it circumnavigates the city of Baltimore. But in this area, it's it's a river. It's a river off the Chesapeake Bay that forms the Boston Harbor. And the only way you can circle Baltimore is either through tunnel or bridge. Now, there is a tunnel there as well. But for various reasons, you got to have a bridge, too, because there's certain trucks that won't work in a tunnel that you don't want in a tunnel either, by the way. So it's a very, very highly trafficked bridge. And as you can see, when the ship loses its power and maybe even suffered engine failure, they're still looking into it. It just keeps drifting. Now, it's somehow recovered and it's turned its power back on. But now you can see as it turns its power back on, it seems to steer itself right into the pylon structure holding up the bridge. It loses its power a second time. And then as cars continue to drive across the bridge, but fewer, thankfully, at this moment. Oh, absolute devastation. I'm going to let this play on a loop here. There is no sound. It's a harrowing thing to watch. You can also see flashing lights on the bridge because there were construction crews. This bridge was built in the early 70s. It was officially named Francis Scott Key in 1976 as part of the bicentennial to commemorate the fact that right near there, about 100 feet from there, there's a buoy painted red, white, and blue. It marks where the ship was that Francis Scott Key was standing on as he watched the bombardment of Baltimore Harbor and Fort McHenry. It inspired him at that moment to write the Star-Spangled Banner, which is now, of course, our national anthem. It's an incredible scene. And we can only imagine what would have happened if this was during rush hour. Thank God it wasn't. And of course, immediately after this event, there's been incredible speculation about what went wrong here. A lot of experts, I am not one of them, have questioned why this happened in the first place. There's a lot of protocols in place to keep this sort of thing from happening. By the way, speaking of Francis Scott Key and the Star-Spangled Banner, by dawn's early light, this was the scene. Just at the crack of dawn, as you can see from the pink hue on the ocean, or on the bay, excuse me. You can see the incredible wreckage there in Baltimore. The cargo ship, by the way, the Dolly, is under Singaporean registration. But I suspect as things start to be uncovered that, like most Singapore companies, and certainly like the vast majority of sea freighters, there's probably some Chinese investment in this company as well. Because of that, and because of other aspects of this, there was immediate speculation that perhaps this was a terror attack, or that in some way this was deliberate. We don't know that. The FBI and law enforcement jumped out in front of cameras and microphones to try to put a damper on that and say There's no indication that this was a terror attack, although it also seems pretty early to be that definitive, doesn't it? It should be investigated. And as usual, the initial reports on something like this, if anyone dares to try to speculate, will end up being found wrong. That's what happens whenever there's a mass shooting event and people immediately start thinking that it's a crazy white right wing angry man who wants to just kill anybody of color. And of course, it ends up not being the case in the vast majority of the time. So we don't know. We really don't know. But there have been questions that deserve to be answered. For instance, when a ship of this size makes its way in and out of a busy harbor, an incredibly busy harbor, there are pilots involved, there are tugboats involved, and there are protocols in place if something goes wrong, as clearly something did go wrong here, to keep a disaster from happening. I heard from experts during my morning show, my radio show today, that said, listen, if something like this happens and you've got a failure, and clearly this ship suffered some kind of failure, as every bit of evidence shows us, if you've lost control of the ship, which clearly they did lose control, you drop anchor. You drop anchor right then and there. That keeps you from drifting into a bridge like this. But we don't have the answers. We don't know whether that occurred or not. What we do know is this is very rare. This sort of thing doesn't happen, right? Do you remember a time when ships were just plowing into bridges like this in America and causing bridge collapses? Of course not. I don't. Now, Democrats who just want to make sure that more tax dollars are taken from your wallet and spent on so-called infrastructure projects will say, well, this is just because of neglect of our crumbling infrastructure. No, it's not. That bridge wasn't crumbling. It wasn't collapsing. There wasn't a deterioration there. This has nothing to do with infrastructure. This has to do with basic know-how and protocols on what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to operate at times like this. This isn't about infrastructure. This is about competence. Which brings us to the Secretary of Transportation. Now, I want to be sure to tell you that there is no evidence at all to suggest that what happened last night in Baltimore, Maryland, is a direct result of incompetence in the Department of Transportation under the watchful direction of Secretary Pete Buttigieg, whose job up until this point in government was to be the mayor of the fourth largest city in Indiana, South Bend, which, as far as I know, has no traversable waterways of any kind. And as mayor of South Bend, his greatest transportation challenge had to do with making sure potholes were filled on a regular basis. And I'm told he didn't even do that very well. But Pete Buttigieg is in charge of the transportation department in the United States of America. And up until the last year or so, Pete Buttigieg pretty much defined his role as Secretary of Transportation, not on making sure that our waterways were safely traversed and that planes were flying in a safe and orderly and expedited fashion, or the trains stayed on their tracks. No. His claim to fame was to say that there was inherent racism in expressways, freeways, and overpasses in this country.
If an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly Black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or that would have been in New York, was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices. I don't think we have anything to lose by confronting that simple reality, and I think we have everything to gain by acknowledging it and then dealing with it, which is why the Reconnecting Communities, that $1 billion, is something we want to get to work right away.
Yeah, that was the priority. But I'm not being fair. That wasn't his only priority. Let's not forget, he was also interested in making sure that the Earth's temperature stayed at the level that I guess he and his friends from South Bend decided it had to stay at. You know, whenever people talk about global warming and that the Earth is getting hotter, they can never answer a basic question. What is the optimal temperature for this planet? What are we aiming for here? But Pete Buttigieg knows that it's too hot. And therefore, as Secretary of Transportation, he's going to do whatever he can to make sure that he fixes that problem.
Climate is not nonsense. Dealing with climate change is one of the biggest things that people like me and people like him will be remembered for after we're gone. And climate is not.
That's not entirely true, Pete. You're going to be remembered for this.
I'm still surprised that some people were surprised when I pointed to the fact that if a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or it would have been in New York, was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices.
Yeah. He'll be remembered as a punchline, as a smug narcissist playing to the liberal Marxist left in this country, as the really good guy, nice guy who's so smart and he really pushes back and tells it like it is. Because yes, you betcha expressways are racist and bridges are racist and overpasses are racist. And that's what we want out of our Department of Transportation. Again, I'm not saying that this bridge collapse is his fault. But if you have this sinking feeling in this country that the basics are no longer being attended to, that things that we used to take for granted are now crumbling around us. And at the same time, we were told that people like this guy were the smart ones, the grown-ups, right? Everything in the Trump administration, they were amateurs. It was chaotic in the Trump administration. Now we've got the Ivy Leagues back in charge. We've got the grown-ups back in charge. We've got the competent ones back in charge. And he's the poster child for that. And so let's take a look at Pete Buttigieg's record as the Secretary of Transportation. Again, not saying that he's responsible for all of these things, but we've got doors falling off of airplanes mid-flight. We've got wheels falling off of airplanes at takeoff. We've got train derailments, including catastrophic chemical spills of train derailments in East Palestine, Ohio, and all across the country. And now we've got a ship going through a harbor and under a bridge that, since literally before Pete Buttigieg was born, there was nary an incident. But now suddenly, not because of infrastructure, not because of racism, not because of climate change, but because the basic protocols that we have all known we're supposed to follow on a daily basis in mundane things like piloting a ship in and out of a harbor, suddenly somehow that got overlooked, it appears. And I'm not saying Pete Buttigieg is responsible for it. What I'm saying is this didn't happen before. And yet this guy keeps getting a pass. This guy is the best and brightest. This guy's phenomenal. I'll tell you this. This I do know for sure. I've done enough with the speculation, enough with the, I don't know, maybe Pete Buttigieg should have done something better. Maybe he should have focused on making sure our harbors are safe instead of focusing on racist overpasses and climate change. Enough with the maybes. I will tell you this definitively. If this happened, if this string of events happened, the events that I just laid out that have happened under Pete Buttigieg, not to mention two other major things, billions of dollars allocated to install brand new electric vehicle chargers, and what, a half a dozen have actually been installed. Where's all the money, Pete? And let's not forget the fiasco of the supply chain crisis that started this administration that he seemed completely clueless about. If all of those things happened during the Trump presidency, I guarantee you, no speculation at all, the Transportation Secretary would have been forced to resign. By the media, at the very least, but probably by Donald Trump. But no, I'm sure everything's fine in this country because after all, the grown-ups are back in charge. And I mean, everything is so much better now, 3 years in. Thank God we got rid of the bad orange man. From our border to crime in our streets, to our economy, to inflation, to national security, our ally Israel, Eastern Europe, NATO, China, the South Pacific, our military morale and recruitment, everything's better because the grown-ups are in charge.